Hello and welcome to episode 206 of the Book Binge, where today we're looking forward into the new year. Instead of doing my yearly general TBR, where I kind of talk about some of the approximate reading plans or maybe some of my reading goals for the upcoming year, and doing that in January like I have the last couple of years, I decided that this year for December, I'm actually going to look ahead for 2025 and actually tell you what some of my reading plans are. I do have some general ideas of some of the things that I'm looking forward to doing this year, kind of like I did the last couple of years, but I also have a portion of today's video where I'm actually going to show you what I actually have planned out for the rest of the year, where some of the stuff in the earlier months of the year are more or less set in stone, and where some of the stuff a little bit later in the year is definitely a lot more variable depending on other stuff that comes up. I think in general this year, I'm pretty excited to get back to reading a few more standalones than normal and incorporating some more of certain specific authors that I've been meaning to read more of their bibliography, and also really schedule around reading some classics again, because I haven't really focused on a whole lot of those in a decent while at this point. Just as always, this isn't a firm list, but I do have more of a plan than past years, as I mentioned. I just don't want to get quite as sidetracked as the last year or two with mood reads. That's not to say that mood reads are a bad thing, but I think after a couple years of doing a lot of mood reads, I want to get back to doing a year kind of like I did in 2022, where I had most things planned out a handful of months ahead of the time. Weirdly kind of want to get back to just having that kind of hard schedule again for a year, and actually like following through with a lot of that. Of course, things are still going to kind of move around and be affected by other stuff in the year. Whatever happens, especially with my work schedule is going to get crazy at a couple of different points this coming year, I can imagine, and I'm fairly certain of anyway, which I'm not excited for. But basically the point is, while I do want this to be more of a firm list, it's also not 100% set in stone. I do have, random read-alongs, buddy reads, and new releases and stuff that I generally look forward to that I still want to be able to incorporate into the list. And if I read more or less than I originally planned in any given month, things will definitely change a bit. I also have the fact that, well, very exciting new release. The final book of the main Sun Eater sequence, Shadows Upon Time, comes out at some point in this month. I don't know where yet, and depending on when it releases and when I'm able to get an arc for it or whatever have you, that's going to move some things around quite a bit. Like, that's going to be probably the primary thing that happens this year that changes the schedule elsewhere. But as of late 2024, what I'm about to show you in just a moment, is what my 2025 schedule looks like right now. Let's go ahead and switch over right now to what my schedule looks like, kind of just giving you all a good glimpse of it right now, right at the start of the video. So basically what I'm looking at, just as I said, the first few months of the year are going to be a little bit more set in stone. Maybe not entirely set in stone, but definitely a little bit more so in comparison to the others. January is a little bit complicated actually already, because a couple of my reads for December that I'm finishing up right now, if you watch the monthly reading wrap up and TBR video for that one, I am currently reading a nonfiction book right now that I'm not 100% sure at this point if I'm like going to finish that in December. I think I want to read that a little bit more intently. And also casually in a weird way. And so like forcing myself to plow through that one just to have it done by the end of the year kind of feels wrong with it. So I don't want to do that. So that's probably going to bleed into January. And I'm also reading Pillars of the Earth with some buddies in the Red Company server for a read along. And because at the time of recording anyway, I'm not planning to start that until probably the second half of December, and that thing's over 1,000 pages long. That's also absolutely going to be bleeding into January as well. So the January reading can be and absolutely will be affected by both of those reads, but I do for the moment have my first classic that I plan to get to, finally circling back to the Aeneid by Virgil. I read the Iliad and Odyssey a couple of years back and thought I would get to this one pretty soon thereafter, and it turns out I didn't get to it soon, so I'm finally correcting that and getting to it soon now. I also have the idea of reading some more Riordan, most every month for a good while throughout the entirety of 2025. I think the Demigod Files will probably be pushed back a month or so because of Pillars of the Earth, for example. But I have this here as kind of the secondary, like, easy, quick read for the month to go along with the Aeneid as like the main focus of the classic, even though Pillars of the Earth will probably be the primary focus for the month, finishing that up in the first place. And then I also have a sort of, if I have time, read scheduled out for being the next Michael Crichton book that I have yet to read, because I just read The Great Train Robbery pretty recently, Congo. So that's going to be the next Crichton that I plan to check out, and hopefully we'll be able to do so in January. You'll also notice at the bottom of each of these numbered lists, I have a title here in italics. That is to denote the manga that I plan to be reading at any given point in time. And also note that I do have a solid asterisk down here when we come a couple months here in the future. My manga series is to be determined by a couple of factors, and we'll talk about that probably at the end. I won't quite talk about manga until I'm done with the main books on the list. Moving into February is when we see that my main primary focus is going to shift once again to Wheel of Time. So whether I'm reading a classic in any given month or a Wheel of Time book are basically the things that I'm planning the rest of my monthly TBRs around for the majority of 2025, if not the entirety of 2025. So A Crown of Swords, book 7 in that series, will be my main focus in February, doing reading diaries for that each Thursday. And just like the Demigod Files in January before it, I also plan to do the Demigod Diaries, filling in some of that Rick Riordan, the Percy Jackson universe side material stuff as I go along. So I could read either one or both of these in January or February, depending on what happens. It might be the case that I read both of them in February instead. But aside from these two, my if I have time read, I want to be able to get to The Dead Zone, which is going to be my next Stephen King read and will be the next book of his that I read for the first time. I do have 2 more of his books that will end up being rereads here in the relatively near future, in the next couple years at the very least. But The Dead Zone is the next one of King's books that I plan to read, and I currently have that scheduled for February. In March, we return back to another classic book, and that will be one that I missed out on a read along for all the way back in August of 2022, finally circling back to it nearly 3 years later. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, one of my most anticipated classic books to read at this point. A lot of people really enjoyed it for that read along. I was very bummed that I had to miss it because of time and because getting my wisdom teeth pulled out. I had a hard enough time trying to read, what was it, The Picture of Dorian Gray at the time, let alone also including A Tale of Two Cities in it at the time. It was just a little bit too much. You'll see I also have another Rick Riordan book. At this point, it will be circling back around to Percy Jackson's Greek gods in there, so some more of that side material, like I was talking about before, and a return to Michael Crichton again after reading a King book. My next Michael Crichton after reading Congo will be Sphere, because I have a collection that has Congo, Sphere, and Eaters of the Dead in it. Those are basically my next 3 Crichton books, which actually kind of foreshadows something I'm about to talk to in just a little bit. In April, we return once again to Wheel of Time, with my primary read for a couple of weeks in there being The Path of Daggers, book 8 in the series, another Rick Riordan side book, Percy Jackson's Greek Heroes, so basically the counter to the Greek gods, except it's about heroes this time instead of gods, so that's something. And then again, circling back to another original Stephen King book, Firestarter, which is one that I'm actually strangely looking very forward to. Not sure how much I'll enjoy it, but that's what else can you say about anything that King has written at this point in time? Coming down to May, we'll be doing another classic book, and that one I plan to be The Three Musketeers this time around by Alexander Dumas, and I'm very excited for that one. That is one that seems like it'll just be a fun, quick, good time, and if it reads as quickly as Count of Monte Cristo does, despite length, I think I'll be able to get to quite a bit in May. But of course, it kind of depends on what my work schedule is like, because March through May is going to be very hectic on that front. So we'll see what I'm able to actually get to during those months. Eaters of the Dead by Michael Crichton will be kind of the secondary, fill-in book at that point. I've also filled in Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World by Haruki Murakami to be read in May. But this one will either be pushed back later in the year, maybe even into the next year, depending on what certain reading plans look like by this point. Because, well, of course, I have the note of Shadows Upon Time by Christopher Rocchio. Depending on when that releases, when I'm able to get an arc, I could start that at any point. But also, like I said, because of work schedule from March through May being pretty severe and hectic, there's a very good chance that, like, in the May and April period, I'm not able to read everything that I want to, and I have to really hold back and cut down on the reading schedule. And Hardboiled Wonderland and End of the World is the most likely book in these 3 months to basically take the cut, aside from like Rick Riordan stuff, which I can come back to at some later point if I need to. But coming around into June, the irony of being middle of the summertime where I live, I'm going to come back to Wheel of Time once again, to Winter's Heart, the 9th book in the series, one that I'm not sure if I'm excited for or not. I think I'm a little more excited for that than The Path of Daggers, because I hear the end of it is pretty good. Hopefully that climax is not overrated or anything like that. And assuming that I'm able to get through all of the other 4 Rick Riordan side material books that I have planned through the first half of the year, June or so, the summertime, is when I hope to be able to come back around and start my reread slash actually finish Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, the Norse trilogy that Riordan did, starting with the Sword of Summer around then. And then, of course, if I'm able to get through the alternating Michael Crichton and Stephen King book for the months all the way prior, Cujo by Stephen King will become my other read in June. I'm looking forward to getting a few more of King's books read, not least so that I can do a couple of King related videos next year that I'm excited about. But going into the next part of the summer is a couple months that are a little bit lighter reading, it looks like, relatively speaking, because my primary book for both July and August will be Don Quixote, which is, of course, a very lengthy book, about 900 and something pages. It might be over 1,000 pages depending on the copy that you get. My copy, I think, is somewhere in the 950 page range. It's split into 2 parts. There's the first half of it and then the second half of it, which was written like a decade later or something like that. I plan to split those 2 parts in between the 2 months of the summer in July and August. And I think even if certain other stuff in the TBR of the first half of the year kind of get pushed back to later points of the year, I think Don Quixote is probably going to keep its spot there in the summer for some reason. That just feels like a good summertime read. So I think that's where I'm going to go ahead and keep it. My easier read to go alongside Don Quixote in each of those months is finishing out the Magnus Chase trilogy. So depending on how things go, I could either have a lot of extra time to fit in some other stuff if I'm able to read parts of Don Quixote quickly, or if it goes really slowly, because I know it's not exactly a plot-centric book per se, not in the way that we generally conceptualize novels in this day and age. You know, maybe I'll have extra time for other stuff. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll have time to catch up on stuff I miss earlier in the year. Who's to say? By the time you're getting to July and August, and especially a little bit later, it's really hard to keep anything set in stone with the TBR, hence why there's a little bit less certainty with the planning there. But by the time you're heading into autumn of 2025 with September is when I plan to come around to Crossroads of Twilight, book 10 of the Wheel of Time, basically finishing and getting through the rest of the slog, or at least as people tend to think of it. And I also have, for some reason, foolishly also planned a couple more John Gwynne books. I'm currently, at the time of recording, reading Wrath by John Gwynne, the 4th book in the Faithful and the Fallen, and I think by next autumn I'll be in the mood to actually read Of Blood and Bone, the sequel series to Faithful and the Fallen, or at least the series that's set in the same world few decades or several decades later. And depending on how quick those books go, especially if they go as quick as like Valor and Wrath have been going for me, then these first 2 books, which are both pretty short, much shorter than any of the Faithful and the Fallen books, maybe I'd be able to get through 1 or 2 in a month. But again, I have these kind of planned just as a general idea. Basically, the classics and the Wheel of Time books from July on through the rest of the year are the only ones that I have like more or less firmly set in place. Whatever else I'm able to read comes down to what I have time for and what I have or haven't had to push back in the first half of the year. So that's the idea at the moment. Moving into October is a little bit of a different month, where instead of going to another Wheel of Time book or going to what would typically be considered a classic, I plan to read House of Leaves by Daniel Lewandowski. Hopefully that's how that's pronounced. I probably pronounced it wrong, depending on where in Europe you come from. Those sort of names can be pronounced wildly differently, I've come to realize. But House of Leaves is a book that was supposed to be a read along in a couple of like private servers that I'm in for a good long while. In fact, it was like, this is going to happen, and then it didn't happen like a handful of times. It finally happened pretty recently, or at least finally actually started back in October of this year. Because of the things that I had going on in my reading schedule at the time, I could not actually commit to being able to read at that point. I was like, I can't do this. I have other stuff that I'm reading right now that's going to take too much time. Like, I'm sorry, I just can't do it. And the friend who really wants me to read this, Reen, was like, no, you're perfectly fine. You already read like Infinite Jest earlier this year. You don't have to read House of Leaves this October. And so my planning it for October of 2025 back like a year ago, it turned out to probably actually be the case. That's actually going to be the book that I read in October of 2025. It's probably going to be like the book that I read, and that probably takes the whole month. And assuming that I'm able to get through these first two of Blood and Bone books by John Gwynne the month before, it'll probably be the month that I also work on A Time of Courage, the third and final book in that trilogy, the longest book in the trilogy. If not, then I'll probably still read one of the other John Gwynne books if I'm not able to finish those prior to that. Like I said, it gets a lot less certain, the TBR does, by the time this part of the year is happening. But I do plan to read something else that's shorter, or at least easier, quicker to read than something like House of Leaves would be alongside House of Leaves, so I'm not just going insane for the entirety of that month. We'll see what happens, but that's kind of the idea that I have going along with that for that planning. Moving into November, however, is when things start to take a little bit more of a less certain place as well, like really less certain. November, I return to Wheel of Time once again, Knife of Dreams, the final Robert Jordan book in the series. So basically, the main goal of 2025 with my reading is to finish Robert Jordan's output in the Wheel of Time. And November is when I plan to do that with Knife of Dreams. And then I also have a couple of other random books planned in there for the heck of it. And who knows if I'll actually be able to get to either one or both of these. Lord of Dark Places by Hal Bennett is another favorite of several friends that I'm morbidly curious about. We'll see if I'm able to enjoy it. I would have this planned more for October, but because of House of Leaves, I'm not entirely sure if I want to plan too much more else in there, especially anything that's a little bit different, weirder, more literary in some capacity. And then I also have Ivanhoe, the other classic that I like essentially do actually want to read in 2025 solely for personal reasons. This isn't one that like I missed for a read along like all the other ones up to this point have been. This is one that I just really want to get to for myself, and maybe it'll happen in November, maybe it'll be December, I'm not entirely sure, but somewhere in that time period feels pretty much right for me. And then you come into December, where I have Shadows Upon Time like scheduled in here as like the main read, but like who's to say like what's going to happen there? Like I think the aim right now is possibly for a November release date. There's the possibility that it'll be later. I doubt it would be any sooner than that, but I think that's the tentative plan or hope right now. I don't think anything's set in stone at this point. Regardless of when it plans to be released, no idea when arcs are going to end up going out or when I'm going to be able to get a copy of that to be able to read. We'll see. I haven't been able to determine anything more certainly on that up to this point. So I just have this like scheduled here as like a placeholder, even though there's a very good chance I'll be able to read it at some point earlier in the year. Also the chance that if it comes out a little bit later, like in the April, say, of 2026 instead, for example, if it happens to be pushed back that way, that the way that Disquiet Gods was, maybe it won't be until 2026 when I'm able to read it. So again, because of Shadows Upon Time just existing, that being a book that I'm very excited for, that'll be one that like the moment that I get it, I'm going to start reading it, which will definitely move and shift things around in here, but I don't think there's much likelihood that I would get that before the back half of the year when the reading schedule, the reading plans, the TBR is a little bit less certain in the first place. So I'm not entirely I'm not super worried about it, to say the least, but yeah, I have it in here more as a placeholder. The other things I have in here basically as a placeholder, because by the time you're getting to December 2025, an entire year from the time that I'm recording this video, who's to say what'll happen? It could be anything, but I do have another couple classics that I do really want to get to. Notre Dame de Paris which is The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. These two books are some of my most anticipated classics because I really like Tolstoy. He's only written 3 novels and I've read 2 of them, so naturally I want to read Resurrection. It's also one that I think that as long as it does what it's doing well enough, could be my favorite of Tolstoy's novels. And then Les Mis is one of my favorite books ever, so I obviously want to read another Hugo novel at some point. So these two are high up on the list, but I think that, oh crap, I don't know what happened there. These two classics are in there in December, just kind of tentatively planned, but there's also the very good chance that these will be like the 2 classics that I'm prioritizing the highest come 2026. Who knows? We'll see. But like I said, I will come back to the manga discussion. You'll see I have Monster in here for a couple of months early in the year, and then I have several months of The Girl from the Other Side written in, and then several months of Goodnight Poon Poon written in. That is because I can't really determine my manga reads. I don't focus entirely on manga reads primarily whenever I'm, doing any of my reading plans. In fact, I thought that I might be done with Monster by the time that I'm recording this video on December 1st of 2024. It turns out that wasn't going to be the case because, well, I focus on my main primary book reading a little bit higher priority than the manga does, and the manga happens mostly when like videos render, or if I'm really not in the mood to read one of the other books at any given moment. It's just like, I want to read Monster right now, and I do. But because it's a little bit longer, because some of these mangas are, they're not super short. They're maybe not entirely super long, but they're not super short either. They're just things that like I want to fit in. If I have time in any given month, or if that's all I can read at some point, or whatever is going on at any point in time, these are what I plan to read. I'm very, very doubtful that I would be able to finish Monster by the end of 2024. So I'm only partway through, like 25% of the way through volume 4 right now at the beginning of December. I'm not going to be able to read another 5.5 volumes of it by the end of the year. That's just not going to happen with my current December reading plans. So I think that at least a few months of next year, I'll be coming back to and circling back to and finishing up Monster. We'll see how long that takes me. I'm not entirely sure. The Girl from the Other Side and Goodnight Poon Poon just happen to be the other 2 manga that I currently have planned as like my major reads of sorts, my major manga reads, the ones that I'm going to come back to for the majority of next year. However, depending on certain other stuff going on, certain inquiries that I'm going to make here at some point soon, there's a chance that I may or may not actually get to one of or both of these next year, in which case these might be replaced with something else, which you'll probably see in the book haul next month, the book haul video in January covering the December/Christmas book haul. Yeah, that one will have something in it that will probably replace one of, if not both of these, for the majority of 2025 and maybe even 2026 as well. Again, not entirely sure how things are going to go, but that's just what I'm looking at right now. For now, I just got to finish Monster first, and then I'll decide what I'm going to read manga-wise at that point later next year. You'll notice the first half of this 2025 TBR is pretty scheduled out. I have that more or less organized in a way that I think is satisfying, and then the back half of the year gets a lot less certain. I think that's pretty reasonable as well. But what are some of the things that you are definitely planning to read in the year 2025? Are you planning to read some of these other things at a similar point as me? I know that the Hardcore Literature Book Club, for example, is going to be reading something like The Three Musketeers at some point. I don't know if it's going to be around the same time that I'm going to be. In fact, it's rather ironic that that's happening because I planned this TBR before the video came out. The video came out, today, the day that I'm recording this? Yeah, just a few hours ago. So it's just kind of ironic that that's happening. But if you're planning to read any of these things, or if you're interested in following along with like the Wheel of Time diaries or anything, let me know. And if you have any other major books that you're excited to get to in the year 2025, shout those out in the comments below. I'd be very interested to see them. But thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you did, I'll be back in the next one, whatever that may be. I forget off the top of my head. I think that might be a review of Demigods and Magicians by Rick Riordan on Tuesday, but I also forget off the top of my head when this video actually releases. But either way, we're coming up at the very end of 2024. I'm very excited to do my year-end wrap-up stuff in January, just like I always do, and I hope to see you guys there.